The last of our samples will be the bound buttonhole. So what I'd like you to do is to cut a piece of your fashion fabric 5 inches square, and then also a piece of your horsehair 5 inches square. And this is going to kind of mock up what your jacket will actually look like when you do your buttonhole. The next thing of importance is the button itself. So what you want to do is to take your button and put it down on your ruler and measure it. When you're measuring a button for any buttonhole, particularly a bound buttonhole, you want to make sure that you also pay attention to the depth of it. So here my button is cushioned because it's fabric covered, and so I'm going to measure up the side of the depth and across. I'm just going to add a little bit for it. So that's measuring 1 1/4 inches. So I'm going to make my buttonhole 1 3/8 inches wide. Okay? Now for most of you, if you have buttons that you're purchasing and they're still in the container, the size of the button will be on somewhere on the card that will take you. If they give you what's called a line, L-I-G-N-E sign, then you can actually Google that for a line chart and see what the measurement is. Buttons are usually sold by lines. The next step that I want to do is to cut out what is going to represent my facing. Now my jacket is color blocked, so my facing is in this fabric. So that's for my facing. Then I'm going to cut out a square of fabric that's about 2 inches longer, 1 inch on each side, than what I have here, and that's actually going to be the lips of my bound buttonhole. And once again, as I said in class, the bound buttonhole and the wilt pocket are very similar, as you'll see in a moment. There's just a couple steps that do make it different, but basically it's the same concept. So to the back of your square of fabric, and again, everyone is going to be different depending on the size of your button. So for me, this ended up being about 3.5, a little less than 3.5 inches square. To the back of that, you're going to put your iron-on interfacing. And onto your iron-on interfacing, you'll be able to replicate what you've done here, which is markings on the body of your jacket, onto the back of the facing. So you can draw with pencil. So I've put in my 2 lines at the width of my buttonhole. I've put in the center where my buttonhole is going to be stitched from that center. Okay, so now my next step is to decide how big the lips want to be, or the welts of the buttonhole want to be. So I'm going to go 1/4 inch. You can make them really tiny, you can make them really big, but I'm going to go 1/4 inch. So this is the dead center of my button here. Right there is the dead center of my button. So my button will be like so. So I'm going to add 1/4 inch on the lips to one side, and then 1/4 inch on the other. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to stitch. I'm going to start here. I'm going to always start in the center. Don't use your corners to turn. I'm going to stitch, and I'm going to give you some tips in a few minutes. I'm going to stitch this box. So I'm going to stitch to this corner. I'm going to stitch to this corner, across, over, and then meet back up with where I started. This line will be used. That's where I'm going to cut my welt because that's the dead center of my button. I'm then going to take the right side of my fabric and put it down, matching up those lines exactly. So I'm going to make sure, actually I like to use a pin to do this, make sure I am exactly on the line that I want to. I can see here that my lines are matched up, my vertical lines are matched up, so I'm good. So now I just want to make sure the placement is. And then I'm going to stick a few pins in to hold it in place. And off to sew. So you want to start in the center of your rectangle, and you also want to take your stitches per inch down so that they're small. Then you'll stitch very carefully, not too fast, and catch exactly that corner. You may need your hand wheel for this. So you're catching exactly where the corner is of this rectangle that you've drawn. So you're going to lift your foot and turn your work. And now what you're going to do is stitch down to the opposite corner. And in that, I want you to count the stitches. So I have, if I can, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll hand wheel to 9. Again, the accuracy is everything on this. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to lift my foot, and then I'm going to stitch across the bottom, stopping exactly at the corner. When I get close, I want to hand wheel. I'm going to lift my foot, turn my work. Now I know I need 9. Let's see if I can count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So here's a case where I have like a half stitch. So I'm going to lift it back a little bit because I want it exactly in that corner. Okay? And then I'm going to turn the work, and I'm going to come to where I stopped. And I'm not going to back tack, I'm just going to go a few stitches over it. And there you have your perfect rectangle. So the next step is to mark in so we can put our little triangles in. So I'm going to mark in. I've done about 3/8 of an inch. I don't want them too small because otherwise they go away pretty quickly. Although again, that's the idea of the iron-on. That's why iron-on interfacing is okay for this purpose only. Otherwise, iron-on interfacing is just nothing but trouble. So now I can go in and open them up. So just like I did with my welt, I'm going to cut into the fabric. And then I'll zoom in. And I'm going to cut right to that corner. So now I'm going through everything. I'm going through going through my iron-on interfacing, I'm going through my horsehair, going through the whole thing. I'm very happy to see my pink thread there, because I know now that I've cut in the right place. So my thread was there to mark the dead center of my buttons. I'm very happy to see that. Then inside we go. And there you go. You have your lips are there. We're not quite finished yet, but so it's nice and neat, which is always a pleasure. The next step on this side is to turn it over and to iron the lips. We did this with the welt. So I'm going to press this seam open. It's not very hot right now, but I'm going to do it on both sides. So I'm going to open up this seam, get the tip of my iron in there, and press that seam open. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is to push all of it over and fold it. And that's going to create the lip for the welt pocket. Put a pin in to hold it. Same thing here. I've pressed this open. I'm going to give this one another little press. Ah, there we go. Woke up finally. Press it open a little bit. Steam up the lens. Push the seam. That's actually become seam allowance now. So push that forward. Fold this over. Like so. And you can see it's already starting to take shape. Okay, flip it over, looking good. Last thing is going to be to sew the triangles. So now from the front, what you'll do is fold this over. And again, I have extra here that now I can cut it off when I'm done, when I'm completely done. So now I'm going to pull this over, the triangle over to here, this up a little bit. Triangle over, and I'm going to stitch across here. Again, we did this, so I don't have to do that step in the video, but on the other side, same thing. This triangle is a little bit easier to see. I'm going to stitch here. Okay, so I've stitched both my triangles down, pulled everything over on both sides. I've done a really good press with my iron, and voila, there's my bound buttonhole. Okay, so now for the big reveal. So let's see how my buttonhole is going to be size-wise. So I'm going to just take my button, hold my breath, push the button through. Oh, goes through so nicely. Great. So there's my buttonhole. Now, of course, this is only on one side. What's behind here is your facing. So now, the trick is going to be how to finish this and to be able to get the button all the way through. So next steps. Next for the facing. So I'm going to take my measurements from my bound buttonhole that's finished. Hopefully you'll end up with the same measurements you planned. Sometimes things have a tendency to get a little smaller when you stitch. If you cut too far, they might be a little bigger. So just take the measurement on your box here, and what you're going to do is to transfer it on to the wrong side of your iron-on interfacing. So you're just going to have this little bigger than a postage stamp, what we call in the industry a postage stamp. You'll have something a little bigger than that that's going to cover the hole, because we're going to do the same process to the back of the facing, but we're going to use the iron-on to hold it, and we don't have any lips obviously on this side. So wrong side of the iron-on interfacing, you want to draw yourself a box that's the same size as the buttonhole you completed. The next step that I show you is just so that you can line up your facing fabric with your jacket fabric. This is not how you're going to do it on the jacket. But place your facing fabric down, and you can feel through where the welt is. If not, you can stick pins through, but you want to transfer the information of where the welt is to this iron-on interfacing. Now, this iron-on interfacing is right sides together. So my iron-on side is facing me. So this is the right side of the interfacing. This is the right side on the jacket of the facing. So then I'm going to go ahead and stitch the box just like I did on the welt, on the buttonhole for the jacket. So I've stitched my rectangle just like I did on my jacket. So it's the same process where I've started here. Actually started here. That's where I start my stitching. I come around, make sure that I catch the corners exactly, and then I stop, not back tacking, but just by stitching over. Okay, and then I'm going to cut like I did. Again, same thing with the making my triangles, getting right in that corner. You'll be a pro at this by the time you're done. Okay, then I'm going to push it all through to the side, to the inside rather. You're not going to be able to press the seams on this because you have iron-on interfacing. But what you want to do is to make sure you give a good pull to everything so that it stays nice and flat. Check it on the other side. A little more pulling. Okay, once you do that, next I'm going to give it a good press so I can seal the iron-on. So I'm going to recommend that you do one side at a time and just kind of check it. That's pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. And then once you get one side glued down, you'll be able to pull easier on the other sides. But I would do one piece at a time. This is a little awkward for me to do with the camera. I'm in a very awkward position here. Stay with me. And again, I'm going to pull. I want to see a little bit, in my case, I want to see a little bit of black. And this is the one time I really love iron-on interfacing because it solves your problems. Okay, let's see how I did. I think I have a little bit showing right. Oops. I think I have a little bit showing right there, but oh, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. So then that will fit on the back side of my buttonhole. So I can see my buttonhole, I can see where the stitches are, right? So that's the side of it. So this is going to go right over that. Okay, I know this is hard to see because I have black fabric, but I'll zoom. Let me get it pinned and I'll zoom in on it. So you can really see it. There we go. See, I have a little. So this is telling me what I want to do is go buy some black interfacing, iron-on interfacing, so it doesn't show. Okay, and there you go. And now my button will go through because it's sewn on the other side. Back it up a little bit. My button will go through my facing, right? The right side of my facing goes through to the other side of the jacket. Last step is going to be to attach these two. So I'm just going to get in here and I'm going to blind stitch. I'll zoom in again. I'm going to blind stitch right in that ditch there. Okay, I'm not going to do that for you. I've already shown you that a couple times. Okay, so I'm going to blind stitch here, along the sides, and that's going to really hold it down very nicely. I can feel I have a lot of bunching. You probably will too because your wools are big. So now I can go in, only now, and cut off some of this. Just be careful you don't cut your jacket. So many things can go wrong at this stage, and we're only putting more and more work into it. So I want you to practice this on your fabric. Check this way you can check your size to make sure that your button is going to fit. Some threads here. Yeah, that feels a little better. And then I'll blind stitch in here. And when it comes time for us to put the buttons in, you'll be ready. Your buttonholes in, you'll be ready to go. Okay? That's your bound buttonhole.